The morning I discovered my husband had emptied our $94,300 renovation account for the woman he was sleeping with, her husband came to my door carrying a certified deed and said, "They are opening your lakefront lodge on Saturday, Nora, but they do not own 1 inch of it." By then I had already learned that betrayal did not arrive with shouting or broken glass. It arrived quietly, displayed in neat black numbers on a banking screen while the coffee maker hissed behind me. 12 hours earlier, I had been sitting at the narrow kitchen table in the farmhouse my grandmother left me outside Hendersonville, North Carolina, preparing to pay the final electrical invoice for the lakefront lodge Evan and I had spent 18 months restoring. I was 28 years old, 4 years into a marriage I believed was strained but salvageable, and 3 days away from what was supposed to be the proudest moment of our lives. The old lodge had belonged to my grandmother, June, who ran summer camps there before a storm damaged the roof and forced her to close it. When she died, she left the farmhouse, 12 wooded acres, and the lodge to me alone. Evan had been the one who said we could bring it back. He owned a small construction company, and I worked in payroll compliance at a children's hospital, so our plan seemed balanced. He would manage the renovation. I would control the budget. I had contributed my inheritance, my savings, and nearly every bonus I had earned since college. When I logged into the renovation account that Tuesday morning, I expected to see just under $100,000. Instead, the balance was $23.11. At first, I assumed I had opened the wrong account. Then I saw 3 transfers made over the previous 48 hours, each approved from Evan's phone and sent to a company called Blue Heron Hospitality Group. I was still staring at the transaction history when his truck rolled into the driveway. Evan came inside wearing the navy jacket I had bought him for our anniversary, but he was not carrying tools or invoices. He carried a leather overnight bag. He glanced at my laptop, saw the account on the screen, and did not even pretend to be surprised. "I was going to tell you tonight," he said. "Tell me what?" I asked. "That you moved every dollar we had?" He set his keys beside the sink and loosened his collar as if the conversation were an inconvenience. "The money is still in the project. It is under a better structure now." I turned the screen toward him. Blue Heron Hospitality belongs to Sloan Mercer. His expression changed for only a second, but it was enough. Sloan had been the marketing consultant Evan hired 6 months earlier. She was polished, loud, and always too interested in how much the property would be worth after opening. "So you know," he said. "How long?" I asked. He leaned against the counter and looked at me with an exhaustion so rehearsed Emmenginder cruel. "Almost a year. Nora, you and I have been over for longer than that. You just never noticed because you were always checking invoices, correcting somebody's numbers, or worrying about what might go wrong." My hands began to shake, so I placed them flat on the table. "You stole my money." "I redirected project funds," he replied. "Sloan brought in investors. She understands growth. You understand rules." Then he told me the part he had clearly been waiting to deliver. He and Sloan were taking over the lodge. The new operating company had a bridge loan. The launch event was still scheduled for Saturday, and I would no longer be involved. He said I had signed the property transfer 6 weeks earlier during a stack of insurance documents. When I told him I had never signed away my grandmother's land, he pulled a copy from his bag and placed it in front of me. My name was printed beneath a signature that looked close enough to fool someone who had never watched me write. A notary stamp from Asheville appeared below it. The date was February 18. I knew exactly where I had been that day, because a winter storm had trapped half the hospital staff at work, and I had spent 14 hours processing emergency payroll in Raleigh. "This is forged," I said. Evan smiled. "You can waste money arguing that, or you can accept reality. The lodge is collateral for a $1.8 million loan. Blue Heron owns the business. Sloan and I are opening it Saturday. You can stay in the farmhouse until the divorce is settled, but I need you away from the lodge and out of the office by noon." I stared at the man I had slept beside for 4 years and understood that he had not come home to confess. He had come to watch me realize how completely he thought he had beaten me. I asked him why he needed my savings if his investors were so strong. His face tightened. "Because you kept delaying everything. You wanted inspections, reserves, written bids. Every time we were ready to move, you found another reason to wait. Those reasons were called unpaid bills, I said. He laughed softly. That is why Sloane belongs in this business and you do not. She is willing to take a risk. He picked up his bag and headed for the door. Before leaving, he turned and said, "My mother and Paige are coming to pack the office. Do not make a scene." I locked the bank account, changed every password I could remember, photographed the transfer records, and called the fraud department before I allowed myself to cry. I cried in the pantry with one hand over my mouth, not because I wanted him back, but because I could suddenly see every dinner he had left early, every password he had asked me to share, and every time he had called my caution a flaw while using it as cover. 40 minutes later, his mother, Diane, arrived with Evan's younger sister, Paige, and 6 empty storage bins. They walked into the farmhouse with a key Evan had given them and began removing binders, receipts, and framed photographs from the office. Diane did not ask whether I was all right. She said, "Sloane has investors arriving Friday and she cannot have personal clutter around the property." I told her the property was mine. She looked at me with pity. Evan explained the paperwork. "You signed it. Frankly, sweetheart, you should be grateful he found someone capable of making the place successful." Paige opened my grandmother's roll-top desk and pulled out a box of old camp photographs. I took it from her hands and said, "You may remove Evan's personal tools. You will not touch anything that belonged to my grandmother." Diane stepped closer. "Do not embarrass yourself. The lodge is opening with or without your approval." Then she added the sentence I would remember at the grand opening. "Consider the money you put in your contribution to the future you were too afraid to build." I called the sheriff's non-emergency line and told them people were removing property from my home. Diane's confidence faded the moment I said the call was being documented. She and Paige left with only Evan's tool records and 2 boxes of his clothes, but Diane promised they would return with attorneys. That evening, after the bank confirmed the account was frozen pending investigation, someone knocked on the front door. A tall man in a rain-darkened coat stood beneath the porch light holding a thick envelope. I recognized him from Sloane's social media. Caleb Mercer, her husband. He did not ask to come inside. He held up a certified copy of the deed and said, "My wife forged my name on the loan guarantee. While I was tracing that, I found what they did to you. We need to talk before they receive the final $750,000. Caleb and I met at a 24-hour diner 2 towns away because neither of us trusted the lodge, the farmhouse, or any place connected to Evan and Sloane. He was 36, separated from Sloane for 7 months, and worked as a title examiner for a regional law firm. Unlike the wealthy avenger Evan would later accuse him of being, Caleb drove an 8-year-old pickup with a cracked dashboard and ordered coffee he barely touched. He placed 3 folders on the table between us. The first contained the certified deed showing that the lake property remained legally titled in my name. The second contained the fraudulent transfer to Blue Heron Hospitality. The third held a personal guarantee carrying Caleb's electronic signature, supposedly authorizing Sloane to pledge their jointly owned townhome as backup collateral. "I did not sign this," he said. "Sloane and I have been living separately since November. She still had access to an old digital signature account from when we ran a property photography business together. She used it after I changed the password, which means someone restored access with my security questions. I asked how he knew Evan was involved." Caleb slid a printout across the table. It was an email chain between Sloane, Evan, a private lender, and a closing coordinator named Martin Shaw. Evan had written, "Once Nora is out, we control the operating property and the personal guarantors. The launch will establish value before anyone has time to challenge the transfer. They think Saturday's event will solve their cash problem," Caleb said. The lender approved the bridge loan in stages. They received enough to finish construction and furnish the lodge, but the last draw will not be released until a title representative verifies that the property transfer is uncontested and the business is operational. "Why would they risk opening before that verification?" I asked. "Because they are out of money," he said. He showed me contractor notices, overdue furniture invoices, unpaid catering deposits, and payroll estimates for 23 employees who had been promised their first checks the following Monday. Evan had told me the project was under budget. In reality, he and Sloan had spent nearly $400,000 more than planned. They bought imported lighting, custom stone, designer furniture, and a vintage speedboat for promotional photographs. They had paid themselves consulting fees while delaying subcontractors. My $94,300 had kept the project alive for 2 weeks. If the lender releases the final draw, Caleb continued, they can pay enough people to survive the opening and refinance later. If the lender freezes it, the entire structure collapses. I looked at the deed again. Then we stop the draw. Caleb nodded, but his expression stayed cautious. We can stop it if we act quickly and lawfully. I already gave my lawyer the forged guarantee. You need your own attorney. Separate representation. Separate claims. We share evidence through counsel and let the bank and investigators decide what connects. The simplicity of that answer steadied me. He was not offering a secret marriage, a fortune, or a fantasy. He was offering a document trail and a deadline. I called an attorney named Lena Ortiz, whose number the hospital's employee assistance program gave me. She met us at her office before sunrise. Lena read the documents, listened without interrupting, and asked questions that made me realize how much I still did not know. Had I ever authorized Evan to sign property documents? No. Did he have access to my identification? Yes, because he had handled permit applications. Had I received closing disclosures? No. Was my grandmother's deed recorded properly? Yes. Did I have proof I was in Raleigh on the notarization date? I had badge logs, payroll records, security footage, and 12 coworkers who had eaten pizza with me during the storm. Lena told me we would not accuse anyone publicly, alter documents, or confront the lender ourselves. She would file an emergency notice disputing the transfer, send a fraud packet to the title company, and request a temporary order preventing any additional encumbrance on the land. I would report the identity theft, preserve every message, and avoid signing anything Evan sent. And do not leave the farmhouse because he tells you to, she said. You own it. If a judge later orders something different, you follow the order, not your husband's threats. At 6:30 that morning, I returned home and found Evan waiting on the porch. He had expected a frightened woman packing boxes. Instead, he found the locks changed, a camera above the door, and a printed notice from Lena instructing all communication to go through counsel. He read it twice. You hired a lawyer already? He asked. You forged my name already, I replied. I am catching up. For the first time since the account went empty, uncertainty crossed his face. He tried charm next. He said the transfer was only temporary, that the opening would make us all rich, and that I was allowing hurt feelings to destroy years of work. I asked him whether Sloan knew he had promised me half the profits in writing. His jaw tightened. I had found the original operating agreement in my cloud backups during the night. It stated that I owned 60% of any business operating on the property unless I signed a replacement agreement. Evan had apparently forgotten it existed. That document is outdated, he said. Then your attorney can explain why, I answered. He stepped closer and lowered his voice. Nora, think carefully. If you block the opening, 23 people lose jobs, vendors lose contracts, and the whole town watches your grandmother's property fail again. Is that what you want attached to your name? That accusation hit harder than I expected because it used my deepest fear against me. I had spent 18 months hoping to restore the place without becoming the reason it closed a second time. Evan saw the hesitation and mistook it for surrender. Call off the lawyer, he said. Let Saturday happen. We will settle after the loan funds. I looked at him and said, Send me the proposal in writing. His eyes brightened. He believed greed had finally reached me. By noon, his attorney emailed a settlement offering me $120,000 if I acknowledged Blue Heron's ownership, released all claims, and vacated the farmhouse within 30 days. Lena told me not to respond yet. Instead, we spent the next 48 hours building a clean record of every dollar, signature, timestamp, and promise. I showed her how hospital payroll systems tracked user authorization because I understood audit trails, but I did not pretend that made me a real estate attorney. Caleb explained the title chain. A forensic document examiner compared my real signature with the forged transfer. The bank preserved login data showing Evan had approved the savings transfers from Sloane's apartment. The notary, Martin Shaw, initially denied wrongdoing, then changed his story after investigators showed him I had been 200 miles away. By Thursday afternoon, the title company suspended its policy. The lender placed the final draw under review, and Lena filed the emergency property notice. What we did not yet have was proof that Evan and Sloane knew the transfer was fraudulent when they presented it to investors. Without that, they could blame Martin, claim confusion, and turn the case into a long civil dispute. Then Evan called me and offered to meet alone at the lodge. The lodge looked beautiful when I arrived Thursday evening, which somehow made the betrayal worse. Warm lights glowed through the restored windows. Fresh cedar lined the entrance. White chairs faced the lake for ceremonies, and the old dining hall where my grandmother once served camp breakfasts had been transformed into a ballroom with exposed beams and glass doors. I could see pieces of my life everywhere. The stone fireplace had been rebuilt using the rocks my grandfather collected. My grandmother's brass bell hung beside the reception desk. Evan stood near the bar with a folder and 2 glasses of wine. I left my phone recording inside my purse because North Carolina allowed me to record a conversation I participated in, and Lena had specifically told me not to provoke him, threaten him, or agree to anything. "You came," he said. "I came to listen." He walked me through the lobby as if giving a tour to an investor. He said Saturday would bring 200 guests, including local officials, wedding planners, travel writers, and the lender's managing partner. Sloane had arranged live music, fireworks, and a ceremonial signing for the final financing. "You see what this can become," he said. "All you have to do is stop fighting." I asked why he had not simply asked me to restructure the business. His answer revealed more than he intended. "Because you would have said no. You would have demanded another appraisal, another environmental report, another 6 months of reserves." Sloane understood that timing mattered more than permission. "So you forged the permission," I said. He flinched. "Martin handled the paperwork." "Did Martin transfer my savings too?" "The account was joint. The money came from my inheritance. We were married." Every time he answered, he moved responsibility away from himself and closer to the marriage he had already abandoned. I asked if Sloane knew the property transfer was not real. He looked toward the doors before replying. "Sloane knows you are emotional and likely to challenge anything because you are jealous. That is not what I asked." His patience broke. "She knows what she needs to know. Once the lender releases the final draw, we correct the documentation, pay you, and move forward." There it was. He knew the documents were not correct, yet he intended to use them to obtain more money. I kept my voice calm. "And if I refuse?" He placed the folder on the bar and opened it to the settlement agreement. "Then everyone learns you sabotaged the opening because your husband chose someone else. The contractors sue. The employees blame you. Your grandmother's lodge goes into foreclosure, and you spend years paying lawyers to prove a signature nobody believes you did not sign." I closed the folder. "I need until Saturday morning." His expression softened into triumph. "Take the money, Nora. Walk away with dignity." When I left, Sloane was standing on the balcony above the lobby in a cream suit, watching me. She descended the stairs slowly and blocked the front doors. I had seen photographs of her for months, but standing that close, I noticed the strain beneath the polish. "Evan says you are finally being reasonable," she said. "I am considering the offer." She smiled. "Good. This property needs people who are not afraid of success." I looked at my grandmother's bell beside her shoulder. "Did you know my signature was forged?" Her smile disappeared. "Be careful what you accuse people of." That was a question. She stepped close enough for me to smell her perfume. "You had a husband who wanted more, and you kept him trapped in your little system of permissions and receipts. I gave him room to become who he was supposed to be. A man who steals from his wife? A man who stops asking permission from someone committed to staying small." Then she opened the door and said, "Come Saturday, if you want to watch us open the future you could not handle." I returned to Lena's office with the recording. Evan's statements were not a confession to every crime, but they were enough to show he knew the documentation needed to be corrected only after the lender funded the loan. Sloane's words established knowledge of the dispute and her intent to proceed. Lena forwarded the recording to the lender's fraud counsel and the state investigator handling the identity theft report. Still, no one promised arrests at the opening. Real investigations did not move according to dramatic schedules. Lena warned me that the lender might postpone the draw quietly, leaving Evan and Sloane free to tell guests the delay was technical. "You may not get the public moment you imagine," she said. "The goal is protecting your property and recovering the money." I understood, but Evan had invited investors, vendors, employees, and local couples to celebrate a business built on forged ownership. Quietly freezing the money would protect me, yet leave everyone else vulnerable to another lie. I asked whether we could notify the affected vendors without violating the court process. Lena said we could speak truthfully after the property notice became public record, but we should not interfere with contracts or make unsupported accusations. Caleb suggested another option. Several unpaid subcontractors had filed preliminary lien notices. If they attended the opening and asked for payment directly, their presence would force the lender to examine the real financial condition. We did not recruit them for revenge. Lena simply sent formal notice to every known creditor and employee representative that ownership and financing were disputed, and that a court-appointed receiver had been requested to preserve operations if the project failed. By Friday evening, the final draw remained scheduled, but only under one condition. The lender's counsel would conduct an in-person title verification during the opening. Evan believed this was routine. We knew it was the moment the fraud would either survive or collapse. Saturday morning arrived bright and cold, with sunlight turning the lake silver behind the trees. I stayed away from the lodge during the early preparations and met Lena, Caleb, and the forensic examiner at the county courthouse. A judge had signed a temporary order preventing Blue Heron from transferring, mortgaging, or disposing of the property until a full hearing. The order did not close the lodge. It protected the land and authorized an independent receiver to step in if the financing failed, which meant employees and prepaid guests would not automatically lose everything. That detail mattered to me more than Evan would ever understand. I did not want cooks, housekeepers, electricians, or couples with wedding deposits to become collateral damage. At 11, Diane sent me a photograph of the decorated ballroom with the message, "This is what courage builds." I did not respond. At noon, Paige posted a video of Sloane cutting a ribbon while Evan stood beside her. Behind them, a banner read, "Blue Huron Lake Lodge, where legacies begin." I thought of my grandmother scrubbing camp tables before sunrise and felt something inside me settle. They had used the word legacy because they believed ownership belonged to whoever stood closest to the applause. At 2:30, Lena's phone rang. The lender's counsel had arrived. The title verification would take place at 4 during the investor presentation. We drove to the lodge in separate cars. I wore a simple navy dress and my grandmother's silver watch. Caleb carried the certified deed, his forged guarantee, and the townhome records. Lena carried the court order. The receiver, a gray-haired accountant named Judith Banks, arrived with 2 assistants and a list of employees, vendors, reservations, and available assets. When we stepped through the front doors, the lobby went quiet in waves. Diane stood beside the guest book in a red dress, holding a champagne flute. Her face hardened when she saw me. "You were not invited," she said. "Sloane invited me personally," I replied. "She wanted me to see what she built." Paige hurried toward Evan, who was speaking with a group of investors near the ballroom entrance. Sloane saw Caleb and froze. For a moment, none of them understood why we were together. Then Evan noticed Lena and the leather folder beneath her arm. He excused himself from the investors and approached with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Nora, this is not the time. You selected the time when you scheduled the financing presentation on my property." He took my elbow, but I pulled away. "Do not touch me." People nearby began watching. Evan lowered his voice. "You said you needed until this morning." "I did." "My answer is no." His face changed. "You are making a mistake." Before I could reply, A man from the private lender stepped onto the small stage at the front of the ballroom and tapped the microphone. He introduced himself as Warren Cole, General Counsel for Ridgecrest Capital, and announced that final financing documents would be reviewed before the ceremonial release. Evan's confidence returned. He believed the public setting would protect him. He and Sloane joined Warren on stage while guests filled the ballroom. The lake glowed behind the windows. A string quartet stopped playing. Warren congratulated the founders, praised the renovation, and then asked the title representative to confirm Blue Heron's ownership of the underlying property. Martin Shaw, the notary and closing coordinator, stood near the side wall looking as if he had not slept. Before he could speak, Lena walked to the front and handed Warren the court order. The room filled with whispers. Warren read the first page, then looked at Evan. "Mr. Bennett, this order states that ownership of the property is disputed and that the transfer document supporting this loan may contain a forged signature." Evan raised both hands. "This is a bitter spouse attempting to disrupt a lawful business transaction. My attorney will address it." "Your attorney received notice yesterday," Lena said. "He declined to appear." Sloane stepped forward. "This is harassment." Nora signed the transfer. Lena nodded toward the examiner, who placed enlarged copies of the signatures on the presentation screen. My real signature appeared on the left, formed with a narrow N and a distinct upward line through the final T. The forged signature appeared on the right, heavier, slower, and missing the final stroke. Then the screen changed to my hospital badge log, showing me entering the Raleigh payroll office at 6:12 that morning and leaving at 9:47 that night. Security footage followed, showing me carrying food into a conference room at the exact minute Martin claimed to have watched me sign documents in Asheville. A woman near the front whispered, "That is 200 miles away." Martin's face drained of color. Warren asked him whether he had personally witnessed the signature. Martin looked at Evan, then at the state investigator standing quietly near the ballroom doors. "I relied on identification provided by Mr. Bennett," he said. "That is not what the acknowledgement says," Warren replied. Evan moved toward him. "Martin, do not do this." The investigator stepped between them. "Stay where you are, Mr. Bennett." The room became completely silent. Caleb then approached the stage and handed Warren the forged personal guarantee bearing his electronic signature. "My wife submitted this after we separated," he said. The digital provider confirmed access was restored from an email address controlled by Blue Heron. Sloane's expression cracked. "You gave me permission to manage our business accounts. Not after November, and never to pledge our home for your boyfriend's lodge." Diane pushed through the guests and shouted, "This is a family matter. You cannot humiliate them in front of everyone." I turned toward her. "You called the money Evan stole my contribution to a future I was too afraid to build. I wanted you to see where that future came from." Vendors had begun gathering near the back wall. I recognized the electrician whose invoice I had tried to pay, the florist, 2 kitchen suppliers, and a carpenter who had restored my grandmother's bell. Warren asked Blue Heron's bookkeeper to confirm available cash. The woman stared at Sloane, then said, "There is less than $9,000 in the operating account." A murmur moved through the room. Evan said the final draw would cover every balance. Warren closed the financing folder. "There will be no final draw. Ridgecrest Capital is freezing all disbursements and referring the file for fraud review." Sloane grabbed Evan's arm. "You said the title issue was handled." He pulled away from her. "You hired Martin. You gave him Nora's identification. Because you said Caleb's guarantee would protect us." Their alliance collapsed in less than 30 seconds. Each tried to place the crime in the other's hands, while 200 witnesses listened. Evan pointed at me and said, "She agreed to settle. She came here Thursday. She knew the business would fail without this money." Lena produced the recording. She did not play the entire conversation. She played only Evan's words. "Once the lender releases the final draw, we correct the documentation, pay you, and move forward." Warren looked at him. "You intended to obtain funds before correcting documents you knew were defective?" Evan's mouth opened, but nothing came out. At that moment, Judith Banks walked onto the stage and introduced herself as the court-authorized temporary receiver. She explained that the lodge would not immediately close, that guest deposits would be segregated, that employees scheduled to work would be paid from protected operating revenue where possible, and that all vendor claims would be reviewed. The atmosphere shifted. People who had been afraid of losing everything began to understand that Evan and Sloane were not the only path forward. The lodge could survive without them. That was the defeat neither of them had imagined. Evan could have accepted losing me. He could have accepted losing money. He could not accept that the project would continue while his name disappeared from it. He lunged for the folder containing the original transfer. The investigator caught his wrist before he reached it. Another investigator approached Sloane and asked her to step away from the stage. She began shouting that Caleb had trapped her, that Evan had promised the documents were legal, and that I had always planned to steal the business from them. I looked at her and said, "You cannot steal what was never yours." Diane started crying. Paige slipped out through a side door. Guests lifted phones despite the staff asking them not to record. Evan looked directly at me as the investigator placed him under arrest for identity theft, forgery, and obtaining property through false pretenses. "Nora, stop this," he said. "Tell them this can be handled in the divorce." 4 years earlier, I would have rushed to calm him simply because he sounded frightened. That afternoon, I heard the fear and recognized it as the first honest thing he had given me. "I did not empty the account," I said. "I did not forge the deed. I did not lie to the lender. You built this." The investigators led him through the ballroom he had designed as proof of his success. Sloane followed minutes later. Outside, contractors who had spent months waiting for payment stood along the stone walkway. No one cheered. No one needed to. The sight of Evan passing the sign that read, "Where legacies begin," was enough. 3 months later, the criminal cases were still moving through court. But the parts of my life that mattered had stopped waiting for them. The forged property transfer was canceled. Ridgecrest Capital withdrew its claim against my land after acknowledging that its closing process had failed. Caleb's guarantee was voided, and his townhome was protected. The bank recovered part of my missing $94,300 from Blue Heron's remaining accounts, and the rest became part of the restitution order connected to Evan's eventual plea. He pleaded guilty the following spring to forgery, financial identity fraud, and conspiracy to obtain funds through false documents. Sloane accepted a separate plea, lost her real estate license, and was ordered to repay money she had taken as consulting fees. Martin surrendered his notary commission and cooperated with investigators. Diane continued insisting that Evan had only been ambitious, but ambition was no longer a word anyone accepted as an excuse. The divorce took 9 months, not 9 days. Lena made sure the settlement recognized my inherited property, my contributions, and the debt Evan created without my authorization. I did not receive millions of dollars or a billionaire's rescue. I received my farmhouse, my land, a judgment for the money stolen from me, and the right to rebuild my future without asking permission from the person who tried to sell it. Judith remained receiver until the lodge's finances were stable. We canceled the fireworks, sold the speedboat, returned the imported furniture, and used the recovered money to pay workers and honor existing wedding deposits. 6 months after the failed grand opening, the lodge reopened under a new name, June's Landing. I kept the carpenter's restored brass bell beside the front desk and asked him to ring it at the first wedding. The sound traveled across the lake exactly as it had when I was a child. Caleb attended with his sister and left before dinner. We had become friends, but neither of us confused shared betrayal with instant love. We finished our divorces, spoke through our attorneys when necessary, and learned who we were after the people who had lied to us were gone. A year later, he asked me to meet him for coffee without a deed, a fraud report, or a lawyer present. I said yes because I wanted to, not because I needed him to save anything. The most important change happened inside the lodge office. I created a small monthly workshop for women and young couples called Protect What You Build. We invited a banker, a title attorney, and an identity theft specialist to explain transaction alerts, separate property, powers of attorney, digital signatures, and what to do before leaving a marital home. I told every group the truth I had learned at 28. Trust should never require blindness. Love should never punish questions. And paperwork does not become unromantic merely because you hope the person beside you will always be honest. Evan used to say I was afraid of risk. He was wrong. I was afraid of losing something valuable without understanding how, and that fear made me careful. The day he stole my savings, he believed caution had made me weak. What he never understood was that caution had also taught me to preserve records, notice missing numbers, ask for help, and wait until the truth could stand on its own. I did not destroy Evan and Sloane. I simply stopped protecting them from the consequences of what they had done. They tried to open a future on land that belonged to me, with money taken from me, beneath a name they thought would erase me. Instead, every signature led back to the truth. Every transfer left a trail, and the lodge they meant to use as proof of my defeat became the first place where I learned to ring my own bell.